vacation today is Kent Whalen, co-owner of the Whalen Ventures and vice chair of our hospitality committee.
In thinking about our speaker today and the topic of the economy, I have two sentiments I would like to impart. First, when I think about the economy, I think about the interconnectedness of communities and these words by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in the same garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And second, I spend much time these days with my 4 young children, trying to constantly educate them on the value of delayed gratification. So I leave you with this sentiment. Above all, trust in the slow work. We are, quite naturally, impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, to something new. And yet it's the law of all progress that it is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow, let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though you could be today what time will make you tomorrow. Thank you.
And now leading our pledge and forward test is Brett Cogan, Senior Vice President of RW Baird.
All right, let's start with the pledge, everyone. Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the
truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill in our friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
I was standing up here a minute ago. It's good to move over just in case for some of you. So time for guests. Introduce your guests up here and introduce your name, first your name and the name and the organization and title of your guest, and guest when your name is called, just stand up in there. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I have 2 guests with me today. I have Jeff Spurlock, who is the Vice President of Finance for Family. And then I have the President and CEO and Chief Possibility Officer for Family Scholar House, celebrating her 19th anniversary as CEO.
President Kevin, it's Fred Cowan. I have 2 guests with me today. Don Grader and Spencer Grader, yes, they are related, the Grader Wealth Advisors.
My guest today is the Vice President of Development and Communication at the Center for Women and Families, and he's going to join Justin Davis.
And President Kevin, I have some guests to introduce as well. Hi everyone, I'm Delaney Taylor, Executive Director of the club. Jeffrey, is Jeffrey not here? All right, Jeffrey Jewell was going to be here from the Danville, he's the Executive Director of the Danville-Boyle County Chamber of Commerce. He might slip in a little bit. He's probably coming further than anyone else did today. Also, I have Chris Nation, who is the Vice President at Run Switch PR. Welcome, Chris. And to my left in this gorgeous pink color is Jill Wilcox, who is Market Executive at JP Morgan Chase. Welcome, Jill.
The lady's a tough act to follow. I'll get 2 guests. Meeting Paul Colley. He's a market leader in BMG Professional Engineers. BMG. Mark Edinger. He's product manager at Johnson Controls. We actually have quite a few Rotarians in the spotlight this week, so there's a lot of names here. Steve Jester, Dr. Muhammad Barbar, and Whitney Austin were in the spotlight at the 14th annual Interfaith Iftar event on March 19th at Second Presbyterian Church, and that's where Steve is actually the senior pastor. He also gave a great talk there. Several other members of the Rotarians attended, as well, for the program theme was standing together against gun violence, and there are a few folks on our gun violence committee who attended that. And several of the people who spoke were actually victims, either got shot at or got shot by people. One of them was our mayor, who, as you know, was just barely hit. Congratulations to Jeff on it. Who was Jeff? And breakfast with Jeff today. And Underhill Associates for being selected by Business First as one of 5 honorees for Small Business of the Year in the Family Business Awards program. Congratulations to corporate members Amy Luttrell, Mark Holman, Devon Holt, and Rena Sharp of the grand opening and ribbon cutting of the Goodwill Industries' new West Opportunity Center last week. This is a phenomenal place. 1,000, I think that's an underestimate. It says 1,000 people showed up. I heard it was like 1,100, whatever it was. Big crowd to celebrate. The governor was there, the mayor was there, all kinds of senators, etc. So really quite an event, and it was a very impressive place in terms of how they help people get opportunities with education, training, career placement. It was just incredible as far as all these facilities right there in that building to help people who need the opportunity. It's also a good location in the West End. Congratulations to Michelle Blackwhite on a successful 20th anniversary Gallapalooza event. And also to Amelia Gomez Guerra, whose partner's horse won the best design. That's Gallapalooza design. And congratulations to President-elect Lori Flannery on the $6.3 million federal grant awarded to New Directions Housing Corporation to improve more than 100 affordable housing units. Got some really good PR on TV on this, on that particular. And speaking of TV, congratulations to Denise Sears, who was on TV also. A successful event and a fantastic week hosting Honorable Ablakwa, who's from Ghana. One of our sister cities is in Tamale, Ghana, actually. He's a high-ranking member of Parliament in Ghana. And Denise even took him to meet our West Global Housing Initiative homeowner, Sean Tez, who many of you have met before. I also want to remind everybody of our membership initiative going on right now. It's sort of free lunchtime for a while. So if you know people that might be a good potential Rotarian, right now we're encouraging people to invite guests that they think would be a good Rotarian, whether meet somebody in the community or know somebody. Keep in mind that right now, the period of time this is going to be covered by the Rotary Club. And a lot of announcements for our Social Activities Committee. Greg,
There's Kent. Stand up, Kent.
actually, there's an international group travel opportunity that I think there's a couple of them potentially. They did a survey, I guess yesterday. So keep in mind, take a look at that and give input on which of the trips you might be more interested in. If you're not interested in the trip at all, that's fine. But I mean, they're trying to get a head count. Who might be interested in which trip is the better one to go for to the committee in terms of members' interest. I hope you mark your calendars for all the events that are coming up in the next few weeks. Friday, April 5th is Caravan Day, with the Kentucky Humane Society at Louisville Central Community Center. We need a couple of volunteers from 9 to 11 a.m. to help with the pet food giveaway. You can sign up for the Date with the Dog. You want a date with the dog? That day at the main campus. And our weekly reading program with the 8th graders at West End School begins Thursday, April 8th, next week. And 2 weeks. See Walt Kuno for more info. We also need volunteers to help spruce up the Louisville Knot, which Greg Braun actually started a few years ago. So we need, talk to Greg about details, but that's April 13th. I think it's 9 to 11, that's on Sparks. We partnered once again with Canopy and Wypal for a business energy mixer on April 16th, hosted by Republic Bank. Steve Traeger and Logan Michelle will be there at their newly renovated Plaza headquarters downtown. So that's a good opportunity on April 16th in the evening. And on April 23rd, a week later, we have the opportunity for a tour of GE Appliances, see Kent Oil for details of that. And thanks for doing that, Kent. Thanks for working on those buildings, actually. And they, with higher than the Chinese company, one good thing they've done, they've brought a lot of money to Louisville, a lot of jobs, a lot of investment money. So if you go out to that park, Appliance Park for a tour, you will see some pretty interesting robots, etc. You can find more details on all these things and registration links in Sparks. It's now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Seema Sheth is Senior Vice President, Regional Executive of the Louisville Branch of the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. She knows half the people in this room, by the way. She became,
no pressure, y'all are all great.
She became head of the Louisville Branch, which serves Southern Indiana and Western Kentucky in December 2021. Smart thinking right in the middle of COVID. Good planning there. Seema previously served as Vice President Relationship Strategist at PNC Private Bank. Passionate about financial capability, Seema founded the Adulting Academy in 2017, which teaches the basics of finance to young adults. And the problem is, young adults, and even right through high school, don't usually get opportunities to do that. So really, it's such an important function, and it's good you give them that opportunity. She's been recognized as a Mosaic Award winner, and that's either immigrant, first generation, or the parents who came, either moved from another country or first generation born in the U.S. Those are the eligible people and the ones that made a huge impact on the city. And it's coming up May 14th this year, and let me tell you, every time they do that, it's like a really amazing people and what impact they've had on our city. And thanks for that. That's the Jewish Career and Family Services Foundation, is one that runs that program. She did that they give that for her work in the nonprofit sector. She was also recognized by the Girl Scouts of Kentucky as a tough cookie. Watch out for that lady. She's a recipient for her work in the Louisville community, uplifting and supporting girls. She's been selected by Louisville Business First as one of the 20 people who know in finance, and has been featured in Topps Louisville, Style Blueprint, and Today's Woman. Got a lot of publicity there.
Yeah, you know.
Seema co-chairs the board of directors of Canopy, Kentucky, we just mentioned a couple minutes ago, a social enterprise nonprofit. She's a board member of Louisville Public Media, the Jefferson County Public Education Foundation, the College of Business at the University of Louisville Business Board of Advisors, and the Board of Trustees of the Speed Art Museum. Seema earned a master's degree in business administration from the University of California, Irvine, and I just learned this recently, an undergraduate degree in theater from the College of William and Mary, so she knows how to communicate. Seema and her husband are the parents of 3 children. Welcome to the stage. Appreciate it.
That makes me sound much more impressive than I really am. So keep your expectations low. Wow, it was my presentation today. Thank you, Rotarians, for having me here. I'm Seema. I'm so excited to see so many familiar faces here. My goal is in the next 20 to 25 minutes, I'm going to share information with you about the Federal Reserve, a little bit about the economy, and although most of you ate a lovely spaghetti meatball lunch, you will be awake, okay, at the end of this, I promise. I also want to note that we are in the presence of greatness, because the woman that originated my role, Maria, is right there. Extra nerve-wracking for me, because she's going to know whether or not I'm saying things that are correct. Before we begin, the views that I express are mine, and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve or the system. I'll explain a little bit later why this disclaimer goes up anytime anybody from the Federal Reserve speaks. But basically, don't take this information and make a bunch of bets on Wall Street. It wasn't me. It's not me. So, the Federal Reserve. Why should you care? Excellent question. Did you know that the Federal Reserve is actually not the United States' first central bank? We're going to start with trivia. The United States actually had 2 central banks before the Federal Reserve. There was the first Bank of the United States, and then the creatively named Second Bank of the United States. Both had 20-year charters, they issued currency, but they were an interesting sort of private-public mix, where 20% of the board members were government appointed, and then 80% were private citizens. Now, did this work? Not really. It was very opposed by state charter banks. They thought that these central banks had too much power. They were very much controlled by the ultra-elite wealthy. And so President Andrew Jackson vetoed and decided not to continue with this central bank system. That was great. Fine, so then what happened? Well, we didn't have a central bank for a time. And there were 2 foundational national banking acts that were then enacted. One of them in 1863 and one in 1864. And what these did was set the foundation for a national currency. It made it so that if banks wanted to borrow or lend money, they could use national treasuries to do that. So this created the market for U.S. treasuries. It also was a critical funding component for the Civil War. But at the end of this, it didn't really help some of the issues that were happening in banking. There were still these big booms and busts, right? So if you consider this, if I'm a local bank in Kentucky and I'm lending money out to farmers and I have to wait for them to complete their crops to be able to recoup my money, and if during that time somebody came and wanted money from the bank and I didn't have the liquidity to pay them back, I'm a bank with no money. And so there were these booms and busts where if you hear that your bank has no money, what are you going to do? Oh my gosh, I'm going to go and try to get my money as soon as possible. These bank runs were very destabilizing for the economy. So this was part of the push that created the Federal Reserve System that we have now. So the Federal Reserve Act, created in 1913, the first bank opened in 1914, and the goal was this was an intentionally designed federated system that was going to operate independently from the government. So misconception number one is that I, as an executive with the Federal Reserve, am a government employee. Not so much. I am a quasi-governmental employee. The distinction is important. But basically what it means is that the Federal Reserve really cares about becoming and maintaining its apolitical status. So you won't see us comment on things like fiscal policy because that's not our lane. We do monetary policy. We try very hard to remain impartial. So if you see economic updates or economic news coming out of the Federal Reserve, know that it is an apolitical entity and that entities can be trusted. We have a dual mandate. Because we've been in the news so frequently, I feel like this is stuff all of you should already know, but maximum employment to keep inflation level stable. Now, the Federal Reserve has a very interesting structure, and this is an interesting structure that is different from any other reserve bank in the world. And that is that we have a Federal Reserve System, and it has three key entities. All right, these are all things you've heard about in the news, but let's break it down just because this way you can be really smart if it ever comes up in trivia. There's a board of governors, and these are politically appointed positions, but they are very apolitical, politically appointed positions. So right now, the chair of the board of governors is Jerome Powell. He was originally made a governor by Barack Obama. He was made chair by Trump, and was remaining chair when Biden came into office. And I feel like he might be the only person in U.S. politics that has that sort of president, because we really want to remain apolitical in this way. There are 12 reserve banks across the country, and those two things together make up the Federal Open Market Committee. So all of you hear 8 times a year about what's happening with interest rates. It is that committee that is making those decisions, made up of these two components. And they have charged the Federal Reserve System with 5 key things. There are 5 things we're meant to do. We're meant to conduct the nation's monetary policy. That's the thing everybody knows it for, that's the interest rate piece. But we actually do a whole lot more. We help maintain the stability of the financial system, we supervise and regulate financial institutions, we foster payment and settlement systems, and we promote consumer protection. So some of these are kind of interesting. How many of you heard of Fed now? Excellent. We're also really good at marketing. So how many of you heard of ACH? How you get money from okay, right. So FedNow is a new payment rail that the Federal Reserve came out with last year that allows for instantaneous movement for money from one financial institution to another financial institution. This is a thing that almost every other country has that we do not have in the United States. The Federal Reserve accepted to do that. There were a number of very high-profile bank failures in the last year. The Federal Reserve helped in the auditing of those banks, also created a window for those banks to go to create liquidity for themselves. So there's a lot the Fed is doing behind the scenes to ensure that your financial system is safe. How many of you have money in a bank account? Okay, how many of you have touched the money in your bank account? But how many of you are confident that that money is going to be there when you need it? So the work of the Federal Reserve, although very quiet, is to make sure that you can have that confidence in your financial systems, and not every country has that. So, this is me tooting the horn for the Federal Reserve. Let's talk a little bit about their decentralized footprint. So it's a really weird and wonky map. If you see, there's like a concentration of banks over here on the East Coast, and like, whoa, little bank over here in San Francisco. And that is because when this map was created in 1913, nobody lived over here. They didn't need a lot of banks, right? Everybody lived in this concentration. And it has remained this way because we have not reopened this map for renegotiation since 1914. As you all are likely aware, politics have become very political in recent history, and so we want to ensure that we maintain our apolitical status, and it's easier for us to do that while maintaining this footprint. But you sit in the 8th district of the Federal Reserve, so your main reserve bank is in St. Louis, and the little shaded purple area is the Louisville zone of the St. Louis Fed, and that is what I represent. Any questions about this? Alberto Musalem is our new president. He starts on Monday. So we're really excited. He'll be in the zone, it seems like twice in this coming year. So I'll make sure that all of you are aware of when he's here. But also, the bank is run by Kathy O'Neill Payne. She's our first vice president and CEO. Now, interest rates. I know that's something that you all care about, you want to know about, so let's talk about it. Interest rates, what are they? Why should you care? They're voted on by the FOMC. This is oversimplified the cost of money from bank to bank, right? If you're banking, you want to borrow money from the Federal Reserve, is that rate. We use regional data to determine what that rate should be. We publish the Beige Book, really exciting name, 8 times a year that contains some of that data. And we publish actually the minutes of the FOMC meeting now. That's a new thing that happened in the last 10 years. It comes out 3 weeks after every policy decision. Again, 8 scheduled meetings a year. The last one was March 19th and 20th. And they decided to hold rates steady at that meeting at 5.25 to 5.5%. I'm going to share with you in a little bit some of the rationale behind why that is maintained where it is. But before that, I wanted to get to a little bit more information about how we are sharing information as the Federal Reserve. So, Jay Powell, he said, transparency is the foundation for our accountability. I'm committed to clearly explaining what we are doing and why we are doing it. And the reason why I think this slide is so important is, how many of you remember the Volcker era Fed in the 80s? Anybody? Yeah. And at that time, the hallmark of the Federal Reserve was, we are going to remain as opaque as possible. Because if nobody knows what we're going to do, then nobody can game the system. Which makes sense. But it also makes you shrouded in mystery and secrecy. And so then there's a lot of thought about what conspiracies are happening within this very powerful organization. So we've gone the opposite direction. Now we share a lot. You know the opinions of every single board of governor. You know, they're speaking publicly. They put press releases out. You can go to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors website and see the data that they're utilizing. So now we're really trying to be transparent. In some ways, that can be kind of anticlimactic. Because you see, Jerome Powell come to the podium after every FOMC meeting, and particularly the last couple, it feels like he's regurgitating the same thing over and over again. People are like parsing his words. Last time he said the, and this time he said if the. Does that mean that we're going to have rates lower the next? And part of that is because he's trying to be as transparent as possible, sharing his thought process. The other reason why I'm here to share with you what the Fed is thinking, because we want you all to understand that your central bank cares about you. We take information that you take seriously, and if you share things with us, it does trickle up into the FOMC process. All right, so let's talk a little bit about economics. Current conditions. Let's talk a little bit about the story of inflation, because we are talking a lot about it, and I think there are a lot of stories happening about inflation, because right now inflation. This is our current federal funds rate. It's at 5.5 to 5.25%, and it's in response to our current inflationary environment, right? And people feel like, oh, this number is so high, and when is the Fed going to bring rates down? But if we were just like back it up just a little bit, like we're going to open the aperture and now look to the year 2000. The moment that all of us are anchored in our mind right now is here in the post-08 world, where the Federal Reserve funds rate was just on the floor for like 10 years. And then COVID happened, and then COVID happened, and we had another moment of really, really, really low federal funds rate. And what I want to express to all of you is that this is the anomaly, not where we are now. That we had such a period of an incredibly low federal funds rate as a response to one of the biggest financial crises that has ever happened in the United States. If we open the aperture out even further, we go back in time even more, you'll see that we are very far away from our peak in the 80s, right? The peak fund rate was 20%. Some of you probably bought houses during that time, where your interest rate for your home was 18% or something wild, and you're seeing these people complaining about a 7% interest rate and being like, gosh, this is cheap. But basically, I think what has happened now is we are couching our mind. We're excited for interest rates to come down, but what I want to impress upon you is that we are still in a relatively low federal fund rate environment compared to where we've been in history. And sometimes it's easy to forget that. So the March FOMC statement came out. It comes out after every meeting. And there are a couple of things from this statement that I'd like to ensure that you all pay attention to. One is that economic activity has been expanding at a solid pace. So every time I gave a talk last year, the first question was, okay, well, when is the recession happening? And I kept saying, well, if this recession happens, it's going to be the most anticipated recession in the entire history of recessions, because everybody thinks it's happening tomorrow. What we're seeing right now is that economic data is still pretty strong, right? We're seeing that inflation has eased over the past year, but it still remains elevated. I'll show you a chart in a minute that just tracks what inflation has done. And what we're hopeful to see is inflation come down and remain low. This is the trigger we don't want to pull. If, for example, we say, hey, rates have been looking low, we're going to go ahead and lower the Fed funds rate. What is that going to do economically in the market? It's going to create a lot of excitement. It's going to create a lot of spend. What does spend do? It's an inflationary thing. It creates inflation. So if the Fed moves too quickly on the Fed funds rate, instead of helping with the inflationary story, we're going to light fire behind it and make it much worse. So part of the reticence of the Fed to take action is it's better for your central bank to be conservative and move slowly than to be super excited. That's not what we want. Okay, the other thing that is an important thing to highlight is that the committee does not expect it will be appropriate to reduce the target range until it has gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably towards 2%. The word that I want you to pay attention to is sustainably. So I know most of you aren't like me, waking up every day, opening your computer and wondering what CPI is, but if you are, you'll know that a downward trend does not necessarily mean we're going to stay downward. And we've always known as a Federal Reserve that the last mile is going to be the hardest to fight. So getting from a 6% inflation rate to a 3% inflation rate, relatively easy comparative to the 3% down to 2. So again, we're being very mindful right now of that. So let's talk about inflation. This is the CPI, and in February we're sitting at 3.2, which again feels much more comfortable than some of the peaks we experienced, right? We're not at 6%, 7% inflation, but now, y'all are smart, you're good at math. Is 3.2 higher or lower than 2? It's higher. So we're still not quite at our target 2% rate, right? The unemployment rate is the other thing we look at. And I know you've heard jobs, and we've had a very, very strong labor market. There are a lot of economic reasons for why that's happened. But February unemployment is at 3.9%, so we're still at a very constricted unemployment rate. Now, while Fed's mandate is to keep unemployment low, if unemployment is too low, it is another inflationary factor, right? Because we're competing for workforce. I know all of you in this room know that you don't have enough employees, and it was the story that I kept getting told anecdotally in meeting over meeting over the past year that like I get an employee, somebody pays them 10 cents more, they leave. So then I pay them 10 cents more, and they come back. And then they pay them 10 cents more, and they leave. And this is because our unemployment rate is just so low. And there are a lot of economic factors that are causing that. We had a lot of people leave the workforce, particularly those in the boomer generation, after the pandemic began. Rightfully so. You had 10 years of a super strong stock market. Things look good. Why would I continue to work, remotely from my computer or from a mask when I have the option? Other reasons include we had to sort of close borders for a time, so our immigration numbers were lower during the pandemic. Also, the nature of business changed, right? The nature of what it looked like changed. There's a lot of factors that are causing this low unemployment. Another one that's very interesting, I think, anecdotally, is that the birth rate is on the floor. I'm doing my part. I have 3 kids, so like, I'm creating a future workforce. But for the first time in American history, it's actually the low to moderate income folks that are having fewer children. Historically, in the history of the U.S. birth rate, has always been our low to moderate income folks that have the most children, and we're seeing that reverse in the current economy. So these are just some of those long-term markers that we're looking at. If we think like, what is going to make the inflation, what is going to make the workforce picture change, it certainly is that we're having a lot more kids and there's this really robust generation of workforce coming through. It's not happening. So we're looking at things like AI automation, what is going to make the worker more productive, but all of those things are expensive to implement and take time. So this is the lag that we're in right now. This is some happy news. So we're at 3.9 in our unemployment rate, and the last highest unemployment rate was in January of 2022. So we are making a little bit of progress. It's just very slow. The other thing to talk about again, recession. Well, let's talk about GDP. GDP has remained in the positive. We have a very strong economy, even given everything that's happened. A lot of it is dictated by consumer spend. People are not nervous about what's happening economically. People are still going on vacations. People are still, even some airlines have made choices moving away from business travel to more leisure travel just because people are still out there spending money. So you'll see, Q4, Q3, we had positive 4.9, 3.2 GDP. When Jerome Powell went to the podium at the end of last year, he signaled that, hey, the Federal Reserve is thinking there might be interest rate cuts coming in 2024. Everybody got really excited. You know what people do when they get excited? They spend money. And you know what spending money does? It increases inflation. So if you're curious as to why he's now coming to the podium saying, it might be a little bit longer till we cut rates, it's because consumer spend has been just that strong. So what do we think is going to happen? What does the outlook look like? So the reason in the beginning I said these are my views and only my views and not the views of the Federal Reserve is because this is what the FOMC table actually looks like. Before I worked at the Fed, I don't think I conceptualized what FOMC meetings were. I mean, I knew what they were. They like get together and then they decide what they're going to do. But they literally get together around a table, and each Reserve Bank president and each member of the Board of Governors comes with a statement about what they think is happening in the economy. They come armed with their own anecdotal evidence that is produced by their Reserve Bank, their own economic research, and they have a legitimate debate. So until they get around this table, nobody really knows what they're going to do. And so the reason why we say we only speak on behalf of ourselves and on behalf of the Federal Reserve is because even each of those members of the FOMC table are not speaking on behalf of the Federal Reserve, they're speaking their own opinion, because it is only this body together that can speak on behalf of the Federal Reserve. It's wild. There's one video from during the pandemic where they had like a couple of screens up because people couldn't be there in person. But other than those few meetings, it really is a bunch of people sitting around and people having a robust economic discussion about what they think is going to happen in the economy. I think that's really cool. That's how our monetary policy is taken in the States. If you look at other central banks, it is one economist or one head of central bank that is making that decision. And you get a much better outcome when you have this many super intelligent. The number of PhDs in this room is like the making grow up. It's just so many. But anyway, this is what it looks like when they debate. And those minutes come out 3 weeks after the FOMC meeting. So if you really want to be bored, you can read them. I do every time. Okay, so then they also take these FOMC participants and they poll them, right? These are the folks who are deciding. So I think for you all, it can be informative to know what they are saying. They put out an economic projection, and this is what they say in their economic projection. So about uncertainty in the employment rate and risk in the employment rate. And I'm sorry there are so many charts, but we just really love charts at the Federal Reserve. I'll explain it to you. What this is saying is that as it pertains to uncertainty in the employment rate, they're actually, comparative to this December projection, which is the dotted blue line, we were actually a little bit more bullish on unemployment, meaning we think that the unemployment story is going to end. So that's a good news story around lowering rates. What are their assessments about inflation? So you'll see the blue line, again, in December, and the shaded blue is what they think in March. And they still think that we have an upside on inflation. So we don't think that we've won the inflationary fight yet. And the data supports that. Right, we saw a little bit of a downturn in inflation and then a little bit of an uptick, meaning we're not seeing steady and constant lowering of that metric. The other thing we look at is, what do we think is going to happen with GDP? Is the economy going to remain strong? And yes, is the projection of our participants. So they think, in a nutshell, for the things that they care about when it comes to lowering rates, they think that inflation is still sticking around, they think employment is getting a little bit better but it's not solved, and that the economy is going to remain strong. So that means, who knows what they're going to do when they meet next, but know that the economy and the indicators are showing that we're still in a very strong economic position, and the Federal Reserve putting gas in the engine and lowering rates might make all of this a little bit more difficult to control. They say the Federal Reserve is like, we're supposed to be the ones that like remove the punch bowl right when the party gets good, So I also want you to know that we care a lot about what's happening locally. So this federal system with banks all across the country, it's not just lip service. It's really important for us to collect anecdotal information about what's happening in our individual footprints. So that's a lot of what my job is to try and understand from business owners like you, what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of months? Because a lot of the data that we have is old, right? So if you look at the jobs report, it's going to tell you what happened really 2 to 3 months ago by the time the report comes out and then is revised, because it's not really usable until that revision. But if I talk to a business owner, I can say, what do you think is happening in your business? How are you going to hire in the next quarter? And that can often be very informative. A lot of that information makes its way into the Beige Book, which is a really cool name, because the Federal Reserve named it, and we love things that are very exciting. The Beige Book, actually, here's the story. It used to be a red book, like bound in a red cover. But the red was like too spicy, and when they decided that they were going to publish this for external consumption, it was not what was an outward-facing document. Remember, the Fed was very protective of their information. They thought that the Federal Reserve putting out a book that was red would like make people like lose their minds. So they're like, what is the most boring Federal Reserve cover document? Beige. So the Beige Book was born. You can read it 8 times a year. You can get it sent to you via email if you'd like, or you can go to the Federal Reserve website. And there's one specifically for the 8th District that comes out. Here are some highlights from what happened in the Beige Book for Google, this past update. Basically what we're saying is that economic conditions are pretty good in Louisville. We've got some activity around airports that are a little bit disheartening because we have some airports that are expanding service with some of our airports, although the airports themselves are getting nicer or restricting service. We are less competitive on wages, which is great. And then we also are seeing that auto parts manufacturing in particular, capital spending in the auto industry is constrained, but supply chains have gotten better. We also do a bunch of surveys. So what I just told you is some of the anecdotes that I've received. And then the surveys come out and they produce lovely dot charts like this. So what this is showing is, you know, if we ask a bunch of people in that Louisville footprint, you know, what do you think about local economic conditions? Like, what are you thinking is going to happen in the future? This is it gets good line, and everything below it is pessimistic. So we've been pessimistic for a long time, but the good news is we are less pessimistic than we were a quarter ago, and we're less pessimistic than we were a year ago. So we are getting to the point where folks think that although we are still in an uncertain economic time, that things are getting a little bit better. That's what our data is showing. However, we also are very worried that things might get worse. So I feel like this is often the conversation we have when I speak to local businesses in Louisville, is we're excited about national trends, but we're worried they're not going to really impact us here locally. And that's what the data is showing. Lastly, the thing that we were curious about is, you know, what are we seeing with sales and how have they met expectations? And so far we're seeing that people's sales numbers are falling a little bit short of what their expectations were, which is, for those of you that want interest rates to come down, good sign. That people are, again, not quite meeting their sales expectations, meaning could be a sign that we are getting a little bit away from that hyper bullish market. The last thing I'm going to share with you, because I think I'm probably almost out of my time, is the resources that we have available. So I talked a lot about transparency today, and I certainly can't answer every single one of your questions, but I want you to know that there are a ton of available and free resources to benefits out that if you want to do a little bit of digging yourself, you can get to. So they include my favorite, Fred. This is a name I like, because it's easy to remember. Fred is the person's name, but it stands for the Federal Reserve Economic Data website. This is the repository for all of the data that the Federal Reserve system, so not just St. Louis, but all of the banks across the Federal Reserve. This is where we store all of our data. There are over 800,000 data sets that you have access to for free. So if there's ever something you're curious about, it could be something like employment rates, or it could be something really minuscule, like how our CD-to-5 fund is being deployed in my zip code. You can find all that information here. And new this year, this is also where the Federal Reserve Board of Governors is putting all of their data. So it's a really strong tool. I'm not a person that spends my free time digging into random charts. I do, however, like to hear what thought leaders are saying. And so all of the PhD economists at the Federal Reserve and some of the Board of Governors publish their papers through this website. And when they do, they also put out a shortened blog post that's like a more usable abstract that gives you the cliff notes from their paper and the research that they found, along with a couple of useful charts. You can subscribe to a news blast where you'll get just an e-newsletter every time one of these blog posts come out. They're fascinating. And they often, if any of you that are in like financial cells, they'll make you sound really smart. They'll show you all this really interesting information that's very cheap about the economy. But outside of that, it can be a really useful resource. For Kentucky in particular, in my bio, I shared how much I care about financial literacy, and I really, really do. The Federal Reserve produces a ton of free resources around financial literacy. So if there's an educator in your world or in your life, there are K through 12 and then college level resources. These include lesson plans, toolkits, anything that you might need as an educator to share and learn about economic education and financial literacy. This page I'm really proud of. I advocated to get it done. Kentucky high schoolers starting this year have to take a course in financial literacy to graduate from high school. However, we have not necessarily produced any resources. Huge deal. However, we, Kansas State, Kentucky, have not necessarily produced any resources for their teachers to know how to teach those, just like the line. So we put this together. If you are a Kentucky educator, you can pull down a curriculum that is specific to the requirements of the Kentucky law and teach them. So we also in the summer put together a master teacher training program that is free to attend. There's a virtual option and an in-person option. So if you were an educator in Paducah, Kentucky that randomly got told, hey, by the way, you're the person that's teaching, I know that you're a social studies teacher, but guess what, now you teach financial literacy, they can come and get certified and learn how to teach this material for free from the Fed. So these are something we're really proud of, and it's available on our website for anyone. We are also working on one, by the way, in case any of you have folks that are in Indiana, their mandate passed this year. So their resource guide is coming out, and we'll have it available for them next year. Exciting. Lastly, if you're if you're a millennial like me and you're attached to your cell phone, all this comes in app form. And if you'd like to get the app, you can scan the QR code. But it's a really easy way to stay up to date on everything that's happening out of bed. And with that, I'm going to take your questions at the podium.
I like your apologies about the data, that's great. But look about the Fed talks, they always have data, so you can see how they make it. Based on some kind of appreciate.
Yeah, no, it's always on something, based on something.
So I forgot to take one other announcement. This being after this for 15 minutes from now, Mr. Rotary is only, Seema's going to tell us with personal guarantee what's going to happen with stock market next year.
Yes.
Rotary is on. I also want to ask you, what about Alberta Masal, Jim Bullard, in terms of background or perspective or whatever?
Yeah, so I shared with the new president starting up Rotary Song. It was a wide and lengthy search process, and now that I've met him, I feel bad for everybody else that was involved in the search because his resume is so cool. So he's a PhD economist. One of the things that the Federal Reserve is really proud of is that our presidents are always PhD economists. But he's worked both at the New York Federal Reserve, which if you all are Fed watchers, we call them the first among equals. They do all of the, they are the keepers of all of the Federal Reserve money, all international assets, things like that. So he worked there. He's worked at the IMF. He has a broad international experience. He's from Colombia originally. So we're really excited to have him. What will be interesting is to find and learn about his economic perspective. He's been managing a hedge fund the last couple of years, so he hasn't done a lot of public speaking around his view on the economy. So the next couple of years will be very interesting. He will be a voting member of the FOMC next year. So super exciting.
Tracy.
Seema, it's very obvious that you have theatric skills. You did a great job on the
I know, my little
presentation.
drama teacher's right there, turning wheeler.
I keep seeing articles about a vast majority of Americans who are reaching retirement age without adequate resources. I also keep hearing about the Social Security system being challenged going forward. Is that something the Fed looks at and is concerned about? And if so, what are they doing about it?
Sure, thanks for the question. So I will say that we're, again, as Federal Reserve, I'm not going to make commentary on whether or not what we believe should happen with any of the social structures. We do look a lot about what's going to happen with the spending power of future generations, including those that are retiring en masse. What is interesting Squirrel! What is interesting economically to see, particularly with that specific generation, is it's really a tale of two realities. Because there's a set of retiring group generation that is highly financially stable, and then there's another set that isn't. So we have a group inside of the Federal Reserve called the Institute for Economic Equity, and their entire mandate is to look at low to moderate income populations and see how, one, the economics decisions that the Federal Reserve is making impact those populations, but two, what do their prospects look like and how are they participating in the economy? So the long answer to your question is yes, we're looking at it. The short answer to your question around what we do about it is I don't know if the Federal Reserve has a specific place in that. We certainly do.
Afternoon, Walt Kuno. I have a question. Would you talk about the deficit for just a second? I have my own opinions, but I want to hear what you have to say about that. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, I mean, it's something that we look at as well. Again, I'm not going to comment on what the FOMC should do about the deficit, but I will say this, and Jerome Powell said this publicly even in his 60 Minutes interview. If you haven't seen that, by the way, it was phenomenal. It was on 60 Minutes like 2 months ago. But it is one of the, like the bogey in the room, right? It's a huge concern, should be a huge concern for us as a country. There are different economies that we look at as sort of justifications for our current spending. You look at like Japan as an example, it's a sister economy, you have a large deficit, but the way that the U.S. economics is so different than it is over there that it's not really a good apples-to-apples comparison. So I think the certainly things, and deficit being one of them that we need to address. The bigger challenge is that to make meaningful movement on the deficit conversation requires a lot of bipartisan cooperation, and we're right now at a time when that's very difficult to come by. But we certainly think about it a lot.
Thank you very much. I'm Larry Sloan. I have a question that came up to mind. Senator Paul has introduced some legislation that's supported by several other senators. And in his press release, he says this legislation would require the nonpartisan independent government accountability office to conduct a thorough audit of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors and reserve banks within 1 year of the bill's enactment, report back to Congress within 90 days of completing the audit. Can you talk about that a little bit and give us some comment?
Yeah, here's another fun
Good
fact.
question, good question.
Did you know that the Federal Reserve is the most highly audited institution in the entire world?
Wow.
So bring it on! There's a lot of people that have criticisms of the Fed, and some of them are very justified. But we are a highly audited institution. We do that both independently and internally. So I would say, of the criticisms that exist of the Fed, that one I can think of maybe sometimes.
Great presentation. My name is Greg Braun. I used to be a banker many years ago. I've noticed, and I'm noticing a lot of younger individuals interact and just engage with crypto. And I talk about this all the time. I know you have. Tell me your thoughts about crypto and how it's intertwining, and I guess we can't ignore it. It's here to stay, but it scares me. So many people are just enraptured with it.
Well, today is Sam Bankman-Fried's sentencing, right? So it's like a very crypto, we should hear about crypto today. Here's what I'll say as it pertains to the Federal Reserve, right? So my personal opinion about crypto, I don't think actually matters that much. As it pertains to the Federal Reserve, we often get asked about a central banking digital currency or CBDC, and whether or not the Federal Reserve is going to do it. My personal opinion is I don't know what the point would be, because the benefit of cryptocurrency is that it is an unregulated thing. And if the Federal Reserve gets its hand on CBDC, it's not regulated, that's going to be so regulated. In a world in which money is already highly digital, again, we talked about how nobody's touched the money in the bank account, we're no longer on a gold standard. The difference between a central banking digital currency and what fiat currency currently provides for folks is very slim. So it's something that the Federal Reserve has a team thinking about. We certainly wouldn't do anything without being passed by Congress to do it. But my personal opinion would be, as far as a central bank issued digital currency, I don't quite see what void that is filling, what need in the marketplace that is filling. I think it's a very different question than what does crypto do, because I think it has a very separate market. And I think a lot of what makes that market valuable to folks is repelled by the amount of regulation that anything central banks would have. So that's my answer.
Hello, Seema, how are you? Good to see you. So I was late here, so my apologies, and for everyone in the room, Sam Bankman-Fried got 25 years.
He did?
Yes. So, new today. So my question is, national debt. National debt, we're now at $34 trillion, highest level ever, highest level as a percentage of GDP. We're increasing due to the budget deficit and interest, we're increasing by $1 trillion every 120 days. If the U.S. does nothing to correct this, what does that mean to the American people in 10 years?
That's a big question for you to expect me to answer up here, let me tell you.
You've got big shoes.
No, I only have one shoe, I broke my toe. But I would say, let me stay in the lane that I meant to be in, which is that of the Federal Reserve. The national debt, although a concerning thing, is not the purview of the Fed, right? Like, it'll be, like so many things, I feel like oftentimes the Federal Reserve is viewed as sort of this like big brother cleanup crew where things happen and then the Fed is supposed to come in and like make it better somehow. In a lot of ways, the Fed can do that, but when it comes to national debt, it's not something that the Federal Reserve has direct impact upon. We certainly will respond as we can.
You are an excellent politician, thank you.
If I were a politician, I'd be able to have more comments.
She's She's also getting mostly get questions about fiscal policy, not monetary policy, so.
Well, that's because we're doing such a good job on monetary policy, nobody has anything to say.
Hi, my name is Diane. I'm the CEO of First Hour Quick Response. Thank you so much for today's presentation. One of my dear friends was Sister Michael Leo Mullaney. She was a longtime head of St. Joseph's Hospital in Lexington, and she was also the first woman to serve on the board of the Federal Reserve Bank in Cleveland.
Oh, yeah.
That was in 1978. So I was looking at your picture, and I counted 12 women around that table. So I'm wondering, what is the status of women and minorities?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. The Federal Reserve has done what I think is a pretty remarkable job of trying to be more representative of the people that they serve. If you look at leadership, I can speak within like leadership of the Federal Reserve, I can say for this. We have a management committee table, and it is the most diverse management committee table I've ever been part of. There's an intentionality around understanding that in order to get really great information from the entirety of the footprint, we need to be representative and get folks across the board. But I think we have some work to do certainly. If you look at the Reserve Bank presidents, we still don't have, from my vantage point as a diverse woman, I always want to see, myself represented in but we've made an incredible amount of progress. Because of the Dodd-Frank Act, all Federal Reserve banks are required to have an OMWI president, so an Office of Minority and Women Inclusion. And so I think that has helped us in being intentional about outreach and include populations which go to work at the Fed. So you think about it, we often talk about the economy. One of my, again, a criticism I have of the Fed is that we do a really good job of talking to people that care about us. So like if the way, like if you are a realtor and the industry environment impacts you every day when you're trying to do your job, you're keen in what we're doing. But if you are, a mom who has, 2 kids and is maybe working a couple of jobs, and you don't care when the FOMC makes a statement. At the same time, that statement is going to directly impact you because it changes the cost of carrying for your credit card or medical impact. So it's very impactful personally. So I think the more inclusive we be in our leadership, the more we're able to reach those people and make them understand that the work that they're doing with that is universally.
Thank you. Sister Michael was amazing. So for any of you all who knew her, she was a force to be reckoned with. I can remember a long time over her time back at Nazareth talking about the Federal Reserve and how happy she was with the changes that were being made. But many times when I would be talking, I'd hear her say out loud, "Is she done yet?" So she was a very direct person.
Thank you very much, Seema, for your presentation. Excellent. I was a little bit confused about the decision-making process. We were talking about when the Fed meets or a group of people meet, and you show that map of the banks that were set up in like 1914 and how they were, so many of them seem to be East Coast oriented. Same time you said, well, you hear from all these people and they get their reports from their local area. Well, it sounds like a lot of the input in the decision-making area comes from where the banks are, which seem to be most primarily on the East Coast. Is that true? And if is that true, does that make any difference in policy setting?
Yes, excellent question. So what I didn't do a good job of showing you is all of the little, they're not little, but all of the regional branches like mine. So if you think about the footprint here on the East Coast, there are branches like mine that are smaller. If you go to the West Coast, each of their regional offices are a fully fledged reserve bank scale, meaning they have economists that sit in their banks. They have the Louisville Branch. We have community development folks do a ton of auditors. We don't have an economics department that sits here in Louisville. Most of that work is done in St. Louis. If you look at the banks that are on the West Coast, they are each much more robust regional bank system, which means there is a lot more data. There's a lot more boots on the ground collecting data from those larger footprints. I mean, the criticism that maybe there are not as many voting members of the FOMC from the West Coast as there are on the East Coast is an interesting one. I've not heard that before. Something to think about. But from a macro scale, what we generally find is that the trends that we're experiencing regionally are consistent. So you'll see if you have, if you look at the economic trends of your bigger cities, take like New York, Chicago, San Francisco, LA, they will form a trend line. And then the rest of us that are in smaller regions will have our own trend line. And there's sort of a third trend line that is for the hyper-rural areas. And so even though maybe there's not as much like physical bank representation in all of those areas, what we're doing is communicating with each other to try and find out what those through lines are to make sure they're represented. But I have actually heard the criticism of there are more voting people that sit on that than sit on the ones. I'll have to think about that. It's interesting.
I agree. Very interesting talk, and also, you know, to the extent you can, you're being open and honest about everything. Here's what we know, and here's what we don't know. And I really appreciate the commitment to transparency that Jerome Powell made the other day, and to compare those of us who remember Alan Greenspan, he had a commitment to being obtuse. This is an actual quote. I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. That's an excellent quote. He had a commitment to non-transparency. That was fantastic. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. We're looking at her here, out there. Next week's meeting is here at the University Club again. It's going to be 10 a.m. There'll be some sort of musical instrument out there, you know, but something like that. He'll be speaking as well as playing something, which will be interesting. Music director of the Louisville Oaks that recently got a Grammy, by the way. So we're register by noon on Monday as usual, or scan the QR code. There it is. And for the guests, please go over to this table that says, "What is Rotary?" to be with Craig Sherman. He can tell you a little bit about our club. So, thanks for coming.